Hello everyone, my name is Sniping is Fun, and I welcome you all back to the next The 5 list I present to you all on this channel. This is going to be the 5th in the official Season 2 of the Return of the 5 list, which I brought back a few weeks ago. Talked about various, comic book, movie, anime, video game, like Mortal Kombat 11 type topics. This topic is going to be a topic that is a secondary, sequel to a topic I had back when I first started this list. In fact, I think it was the first video I did of the 5 list back when I started back in like 2017. It's going to be one of those lists where I say another 5, whatever. And I did a few of those back in what I dub now Season 1, the Omega Season 1. And these type of lists will be continuing in Season 2 onward, where I do another list of the same topic and I just do another 5. And this topic, if you have not noticed by the name of the video, the thumbnail, when I do end up changing it, is going to be a wrestling related topic based off the WWE 2K games, and it's going to be another 5 new legends that should be in the WWE 2K series. And I mentioned this when I did the video way back then when I did the first video, and if you have not watched that, if you're interested in wrestling, the WWE, the 2K series, or whatever the heck else, various wrestlers of the world, I would suggest maybe go looking that one out. You can go look it on the playlist of the original The 5 list playlist. It's the first video I ever did. But I want to do this again because I could probably do like 7 or 8 different lists like this, because this topic is very open and I could name multiple wrestlers that probably should be in this category. But the WWE games, like WWE 2K, for years now have basically kind of been in the rut. They've kind of been playing it safe, and mostly if you've played them at all, you can pretty much tell they almost always do the same legends. There's always Stone Cold Steve Austin, Sting, DDP, Ric Flair, The Rock, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, various wrestlers that defined either A, the Attitude Era, B, some WCW people, which they still seem to miss out a lot on that, some ECW people, they still miss out a heck of a lot on that, various international wrestlers, which vary from time to time, and namely the Hogan Rock and Wrestling era of the mid 80s to early 90s. That's like the big one they almost always do. The New Generation era, some Attitude Era, maybe some current, recent legendary people, some international stuff. But it's mostly always the same legendary wrestlers over and over again, and it has been since pretty much it became 2K, at the very least since about 2K16. And a lot of legends have even been before that, when it was like the SmackDown vs. Raw games, the WWE games, SmackDown, Day of Reckoning, Raw, like a lot of the same people for years upon years upon years. And I know they're super popular. I know they're super big. I know they're the main guys that define WWE. But at the same time, it gets redundant because, for example, 2K19 that came out last year, the legends were pretty much the same legends from 2K18. They just removed a couple like Biker Undertaker, and then they added a couple in, I think like Roddy Piper and whatnot. It was minor. Like it's to the point where I think over the last couple games, the Legends roster has basically stayed the same, besides a few minor differences. And I think that while that's nice because it keeps it consecutive, and it's like almost adding on to it, besides removing a couple legends, it gets to the point of, what other wrestlers could they add? Like, the things that mostly change each game is the current day WWE roster, NXT, 205 Live, the Women's Revolution, Raw, SmackDown, Superstars, whatever the heck else. That's the thing that mainly changes from WWE game to WWE game nowadays. The Legends roster, which is what a main selling point is for a lot of these wrestling fans that buy it, because a lot of the wrestling fans that buy it, some of them don't even watch the current day WWE product. They love the Legends, but there's numerous Legends throughout history that still have never been included in the WWE game recently. I know some of it's probably like licensing to some of these wrestlers. They're not on good terms with the company. There's been a lot of lawsuits over the years, a lot of various little nitpick type stuff, and little things where they're not on good terms with these wrestlers. So I understand maybe that, but at the same time, it's like, can't they at least change it up a little bit? And that's the reason why I want to do this list. And I know I did the intro for about 3 minutes or so now, and you probably aren't even interested in hearing the intro. You just want to see the 5 wrestlers I talked about. But yeah, I did a video. This was my first ever The 5 list way back in 2017 when I started what I've now dubbed Season 1. And I talked about various wrestlers like Gorilla Monsoon, Mae Young, and Raven and whatnot, Jushin Thunder Liger and Great Muta and whatnot. Those were like the main legends back then. But this is another 5, and let's get this list started with another 5 new legends I feel should be included in the WWE 2K series, 2K20 and onward, like hopefully in a future release. My first one here goes with what WWE, the company, 2K and everything, what they super hype and push in these games, and that's the Hogan Rock and Wrestling era, the 80s to the early 90s era. And I think it's surprising. This guy was a big wrestler back then. He was pretty hugely popular. He wasn't no Hulk Hogan or Macho Man, but he was a pretty big name, and that's The Rock, Don Morocco. He was a pretty well-known name back then. He wrestled in the territories before coming to the WWF. He had a good look to him. He knew how to wrestle. He had a good style. He had a good personality. A lot of people liked him. He would be a big name to include, and it's weird because he's one of the key missing choices, I think, from that era, from the 80s to early 90s era, that I'm surprised they don't put in these games. He was the original person that donned the nickname The Rock before Dwayne Johnson did it. He was pretty popular. He won numerous titles in the WWF. He wrestled all around in the territory days. People knew who he was. He would actually be a name they could add to the game, and people would know who he is. And I don't think he's been added in any games recently. I don't even think he was ever in a WWF game to begin with, unless it was back on Super Nintendo or NES or something era, or something like that. He was included in the Legends of Wrestling series and whatnot, but I'm surprised in the WWE series, whether SmackDown vs. Raw, WWE, WWE2K and whatnot, or in the All-Stars back in the day, they never included him. I mean, he's no Jake the Snake Roberts or Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Macho Man, Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan and whatnot, but he was pretty much, I would say, at the very least, C-level star, C-level wrestler during the 80s in the WWF, and I think he would at least stand out as being a different choice, and I'm surprised they never have included him. My second choice goes to a WCW wrestler, and this one would stand out a lot. He was in the WWE games before when he was actually on the WWE roster back around 2006-07. He was in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. This is his WCW incarnation. I would rather see him actually in, given that during WCW vs. NWO, Revenge and whatnot, he was probably one of the major characters I would play as. A lot of people would play as. He was a huge wrestler in the Cruiserweight division, which, since WWE's pushing their 205 Live and their smaller wrestlers now, it would be kind of cool if you could have the current day WWE Cruiserweights taking on legendary Cruiserweights during the light heavyweight division of WWF and the Attitude Era, or the WCW Cruiserweights, because they still have the WCW Cruiserweight title in the game, but you don't really have any WCW Cruiserweights besides specifically Rey Mysterio, and it's his WWE reincarnation instead of Rey Mysterio Jr. I would like to see him included in, and that would go to Psychosis. Just WCW version of Psychosis, mask and attire outward. I mean, I would rather they do this than bring in Mexicool's Psychosis. He was pretty generic in that group, and I'd rather not bring in the great Psychosis, who's probably one of the best wrestlers to come out of Mexico in the Lucha Libre Cruiserweight style and WCW Cruiserweight division, and just throw him in on the freaking Mexicool version. We already had that back way back in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. I'd rather have a new current day adaptation of his self from WCW in the Cruiserweight division, and his fighting style, he was fast paced Cruiserweight Lucha Libre fighting style, his wrestling style in WCW, and I would really love to see that in a game. He had a cool look. All the kids love the masked wrestlers. Masked wrestlers are huge because the kids wore the masks and all the masks look cool, and he just was a cool Lucha Libre wrestler from Mexico. And I'm hoping he's at least on decent terms with WWE, that we could see him one day. They should diversify their legends. And the Cruiserweights, we never really see Cruiserweight wrestlers included in the Legends roster. And I find that kind of weird, because how much WWE pushes Cruiserweights now? It'd be kind of cool to show where the Cruiserweights came from in terms of Japan, Taka, or in the light heavyweight division, the light heavyweight division in the WWF during the Attitude Era, the Cruiserweight division in WCW, and Mexico Lucha Libre wrestlers, how much they push Rey Mysterio over the years. Can we get some other Cruiserweights in there that are legendary classics to combat with the current day wrestlers of the Cruiserweight 205 Live division? And I think Psychosis would bring a unique style, unique entrance, unique performance and skills and moveset potential. I think it'd be cool. And I think a lot of people would want it. This next wrestler, I think, would add a lot to the women's division. And in my last video, I talked about the Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young, which I know in terms of Fabulous Moolah would be kind of a controversy, but she did help build women's wrestling. And Mae Young did too, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and whatnot. And it's kind of sad that the only legendary women I think we have in the game is pretty much Alundra Blaze. I find that weird that they don't have even more ruthless aggression women. Like, the only one we got is pretty much Beth Phoenix, and she was DLC and including the Hall of Fame and whatnot. But this, I would love to see them introduce more classic women that are not named Lita and not named Trish. And my choice would be, because she was a pretty major star in the Ruthless Aggression era, and she has had a pretty decent career since like the early 2000s and whatnot. And she's retired now, so I think she falls more into like the alumni legends category. And I just, like, she had some pretty big matches back then, pretty big storylines, and a cool character. Can we have Victoria, please? Victoria was such a cool. I would say the psycho version of her when she first debuted, when she was teaming up with Stevie Richards, when Stevie Richards was kind of like her manager kind of thing. I would say that version with the weird lesbian theme, kind of crazy psycho, music. I mean, obviously they probably wouldn't be able to license that or something, and they probably that version of her was a little creepy and psycho weirdo, but at worst we probably would get like her 2004 dancing version. But she was a great women's wrestler. She could go. She was a woman that literally was there as a wrestler, not as a sex object or a model, or couldn't wrestle worth a damn. She could wrestle. She had a decent look, decent personality. She knew how to go. She had previous skills going into it, and she had a good character when she was heel or face, and which she transferred over to when she went as Tara and TNA and whatnot. And for classic women, if it's not named Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young, or including someone like a Bull Nakano or a Molly Holly or various other women that wrestled in like the 90s and whatnot, and all over the world, and even some WCW, ECW ladies, Victoria is my top choice. Can we please have her in the game series, please? My next choice, and my last two choices are going to be two Japanese wrestlers, because there's a lot of Japanese wrestlers that have such a big international love and like international fame around the world. They've wrestled in the West, they wrestled in Europe, they wrestled in all these big companies, and they have at least an appeal. In my first list, I talked about Jushin Thunder Liger and the Great Muta. Those are two of the biggest Japanese wrestlers of all time, and they have international appeal. Great Muta wrestled in WCW for, I think, during the 90s and whatnot, maybe late 80s. And I know it doesn't appeal to this game specifically, but he was in TNA and whatnot as well. You had Jushin Thunder Liger, who pretty much was in WCW. He showed up in for a match against Tyler Breeze in NXT. Those were two huge names. I could still name Japanese wrestlers that have international appeal and should still be in. And my next one, number 4 on this list, is going to go to Masahiro Chono. Such a big name in Japanese wrestling. He was pretty much a member of, one of the founding members of the NWO Japan. He was we always get the standard NWO members. Hulk Hogan, which hasn't been in the games lately, but he's rumored for 2K20 after pretty much burying the hatchet and all the controversy with him in there. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, the Giants. We had Scott Steiner one time in 6 in Pac and everything. But we don't ever seem to get the other ones. And I know the NWO got very, crowded, and they had a lot of crappy people, but he was early on, and he was one of the biggest names for the NWO in Japan. He's big in New Japan, and he also transferred over because of the NWO. He wrestled a lot in WCW, and like I said, WCW legends we never get to see. We get to see the likes of Arn Anderson and Disco Inferno, I think, appeared once, and DDP and people like that, but we never get to see the cruiserweights, never really get to see the other wrestlers from back then. And I think Masahiro Chono, international appeal, he was pretty popular back then. He had a good strongman wrestling style, this Yakuza big, I would say they probably would go for his WCW self as part of the NWO, but you could probably go for his Japan self too, maybe as an alternate attire at the very least. But he he could go. He is actually a Japanese strongman style that could go. And I think in terms of international appeal and adding some more Japanese wrestlers into it, given that the current day WWE roster has Shinsuke Nakamura and Asuka and all these other Japanese wrestlers, and over the years they had Tajiri and Ultimo Dragon and everything. Masahiro Chono is a legend in the business, Japanese wrestling or otherwise. NWO, I think he deserves it. And the second Japanese wrestler, and the 5th one on this list, and he is a big ECW wrestler, which is also very severely lacking representation in the WWE 2K games. If they're not named, RVD, which still he hasn't been included since 2K15. want to include this guy as well. Like if Masahiro Chono, defined WCW, this guy defined ECW in terms of Japanese wrestlers, and that's Masato Tanaka. Really, he could go crazy style. He wrestled in Japan. He came over here. He wrestled in ECW. He was in the ECW, One Night Stand 2005 and 2006. So at least WWE was on good terms to bring him in for those back years ago. And he is now wrestling like in Pro Wrestling Noah and Wrestle One over in Japan and whatnot. He still is in good shape, and I'm assuming he's still in at least decent, terms with WWE. Yes, I would like his crazy all-out wrestling style, namely his ECW version, which is the version I think they would go for, maybe around the time of the ECW like One Night Stand games, or at the One Night Stand pay-per-views, or at the very least late 90s version of him. I'm thinking more ECW choices in general, but in terms of a Japanese wrestler representing ECW, if he's not named Tajiri, it's Masato Tanaka. And I think he'd be a cool inclusion. I think a lot of people would at least appreciate his style he ran, his moves and everything, his entrance and everything. And I would say go for that. And that's it for my another 5 new WWE legends, new legends for the WWE 2K series. We got Victoria, a woman I think really truly deserves it. She's not too old, not in the super old legendary category, but she's not in the current day roster. I think she deserves it. 2 Japanese wrestlers in Masato Tanaka, Masahiro Chono, ECW, WCW representation, NWO, crazy, One Night Stand like representation. I think it'd be kind of cool to see them in there. Don Morocco and Psychosis represent the Cruiserweights, represent another wrestler we have not seen that's from the rock and wrestling era, and they seem to have a boner for putting in wrestlers from the 80s and early 90s. So, yeah, and Attitude Era too, but, definitely those do inflate the Legends roster in these games. But that's it. Put in the comments what you guys think. What do you guys think about these 5 legends? Would you like to see these 5 legends in the WWE 2K series? Or what legends would you want to see? What legends that we don't normally see in the 2K series would you like to see? Like, put it down below. I mean, I'm assuming you all are getting tired of the same legends every year after year. Put who you want to see. That's it. My name is Sniper's Fun. Peace. Subscribe if you want to, and stay tuned for the next video. See you all later.